Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. History does not whisper in our lifetime, it thunders. Nations are tested, alliances are strained, and the moral weight of leadership settles on those called to stand in the storm. In such moments, diplomacy is no longer ceremony. It is strategy, it is conviction, it is the voice of a nation carried across oceans. Today, we are deeply honored to sit with a man at one of the most consequential crossroads of our era, Dr. Yechiel Michael Leiter, Israel's ambassador to the United States. Welcome, Ambassador.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
Great to have you. His appointment is not the result of a single moment, but the culmination of a life shaped by intellect, policy, and public service. The ambassador served in senior advisory roles to Israel's leadership, including as chief of staff to Benjamin Netanyahu, during his tenure as finance minister, in key positions across government ministries and national institutions. His work has spanned education policy, strategic planning, and infrastructure, fields where vision must withstand reality. Yet he is not only a practitioner of statecraft, but a scholar of it, holding a doctorate in political philosophy and training in law and international relations. The ambassador has written and lectured widely on democracy, governance, and the moral foundation of power. Few diplomats arrive with both the academic depth to interpret history and the practical experience to help shape it. The ambassador also carries the personal weight of sacrifice. His firstborn son, Lieutenant Colonel Moshe Yechiel Leiter, Zacharenu Livracha, an elite Israeli combat officer, was killed in action in Gaza during the war following October 7th. That loss has become inseparable from his public voice as he speaks about his son's sacrifice and the moral burdens borne by those who serve. Michael Leiter brings together three rare callings: senior government practitioner, trained political philosopher, and a diplomat. His career bridges theory and policy, scholarship, and statecraft. This is not merely an interview. It is a conversation at the fault line of our times. Ambassador Michael Leiter, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you. Thank you for that kind introduction, perhaps too kind.
Well, you have a heck of a resume. Like when you hear your introduction, do you say, whoa, that's me, I've done a good job?
No, I say, gee, I've lost the hair on top of my head and the rest has become gray.
And I have to tell you, I know you were born October 1st, 1959. I'm April 27th, 1960, and I still have hair. So
maybe there's still hope for me, you say.
There might be. One never knows. Now, let's give a context to our schmooze here. You used to be an activist in Hebron, not on a municipal governance sort of level, but advocacy, speaking on behalf of Hebron, letting the world know it's strategically why it's so important, not only where it's placed, but also historically what Hebron is all about. That's where you met my family. And I have to tell you that my family absolutely adores you and are very grateful for your work. I myself went to Hebron when my father, God bless his souls, we actually dedicated, I think, a building there. It was the hospital that was from 1929, I believe it was. But I guess that was a road that's been a while back, right? You've come a long way since then.
It was a while back. I'd say probably in excess of 35 years. On a trip to Canada, I think I initially met with your family and invited them to visit Hebron. And at the time I was living there, my first four children were born in Hebron. Hebron is the beginnings of the Jewish story. I mean, that's where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob lived. That's where they're buried, the cave of the patriarchs. That's where King David established the kingdom of Israel for the first 7 years prior to moving it to Yerushalayim. And it's also a community that had an unbroken chain of Jewish settlement, of a thriving Jewish life until it was cut short by the pogrom of 1929, when some 69 Jews were killed and the rest driven out by the British. So yes, in Beit Hadassah, which was a clinic established by Hadassah women in the 1920s, shortly before the massacre, we established a museum at the time, which your family was kind enough to dedicate and secure the funds necessary for that museum to be built and established. And it really is a very meaningful commemoration to those poor souls who were slaughtered in the massacre. Many of them were yeshiva students who came to the famous Slobodka Yeshiva in Hebron, which had moved from Europe to Hebron in 1925 and came to what was already a thriving Jewish community, which had been a thriving Jewish community for many, many years. It was both a Ashkenazic and Sephardic community.
Yes.
And we reestablished the community in the late 1970s. And I was privileged to live there for several years and to lead the Jewish community and some of the rebuilding of its neighborhoods, the Jewish Quarter, the old Jewish neighborhood, the ancient Jewish neighborhood of Hebron way up on the hilltop, and of course Beit Hadassah and Beit Romano, which now houses the big yeshiva in Hebron. So yes, we go back a few years, and I'm honored to say that I was able to involve your family in some
Thank you.
wonderful reconstitution of Jewish history.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ambassador, I asked Nathan Sharansky once about his 12 years in the Gulag. And my premise was, I said to him, those must have been very challenging and difficult days. And this was a time where he was an MK in the Knesset. And he turned to me and he said, no, those were very simple days. He said, and I'm just wondering now that your job is so complicated, and we're going to get into that in a moment, do you look back in those days in Hebron and say, oh, the simplicity of it, it would be nice to be back there?
No, I don't really remember simple days. I'm born into a generation which every once in a while causes me to pinch myself and say, you're really part of this.
Yes.
You're really alive in an age when the biggest miracle, I think, in the course of the annals of human history has taken place. And that's the return of the people of Israel to the land of Israel. There's nothing that in any way resembles this miracle. There is no other people in the world exiled from their land that returns to their land. And not only were we exiled from our land, but we were driven to the four corners of the earth. And not only were we driven to the four corners of the earth, we were persecuted both physically and spiritually everywhere we were driven to. That all culminated in a crime, the greatest crime committed by humankind to humankind in the Holocaust. And people often say that we came back to Israel because of the Holocaust, which is simply not true. We came back to Israel despite the Holocaust. Any other people would have collapsed and evaporated into the chimneys of Nazi barbarism. We refused to do that. We're a very resilient people. And that resilience came to fruition in the reestablishment of the State of Israel, in fulfillment of prophecies 2,500 and 3,000 years old. And I'm part of that. I'm, and my children were all born into that miracle, all in the areas where Judaism was born, in Judea and Samaria. 4 were born south of Jerusalem, 4 were born north of Jerusalem. And they have the privilege of being tzabarim, of being sabras, of being born in their homeland without all of the psychological hangups that very often afflict Jews around the world who deal on a daily basis with their own identity crisis. We don't have identity crises in Israel, and that's a very, I would say, empowering feeling that I have, and a very, very great privilege that I have.
the thing that fascinated about you that fascinated about that when I was studying you, was doing my research, I was amazed at your resume because you are a PhD and you are a rabbi. You've received smicha, and you are a diplomat. And these are three really divergent sort of places to go in life and to study. What you do today as an ambassador, do you feel that you bring all those aspects of yourself together in terms of working through ideas and thoughts, diplomacy, helping Israel and the United States work through perhaps some challenges?
Well, it's a very interesting question. And yes, the answer to that question is yes. I do feel that in many ways that all of my life was preparation for this particular position of representing Israel and the Jewish people in the capital of the world, in Washington. And I find that much of my life experience is tapped into in the course of my duties here in Washington. I'm first of all in the area of diplomacy, obviously, understanding what Washington is, where American democracy came from, what liberalism is. I did my PhD study on John Locke and his use of the Hebrew Bible. So, there's an element of one of the founders of modern liberalism, of modernism as a whole, and who I dived into very deeply. In order to understand Locke, I had to understand the years that preceded him, the Protestant Reformation, for example, and the contest between the reformers and the counter-reformers, the early Protestants, the early Jesuits, and the Catholic Church, and what the response was. So I'm deeply steeped in the 16th and 17th centuries and everything that followed, which is a tremendous plus. I must find, when I visit churches, and I visit churches almost every Sunday. I was also trained to give sermons Shabbat morning in synagogues, but I find myself more often giving sermons in churches these days. We have 70 million evangelical friends in the United States, and we haven't said thank you enough to them. We haven't embraced them enough. We've been a little bit timid about the relationship, and that's a mistake. I'm very much in favor of being a proud Jew, and I believe they are very happy about that as well. And I'm happy about Christians being proud and committed Christians. And I'm elated when I go into a church parking lot on a Sunday morning, and as far as the eye could see, the parking lot is filled with people coming to pay homage to the God of creation. And if we have differences over when prophecy ended and when prophecy will begin, and what the end of days looks like, we could discuss that. But we have so much in common when it comes to values and interests today that we need to embrace each other. So I pay a lot of attention to my Christian colleagues, a lot of time with Christian pastors who are committed to Israel and committed to a sound relationship between the United States and Israel. And of course, being able to embrace all strata of the Jewish community. I don't just go to one denomination. I try to, spread my love as far and as wide as I can to all the various denominations. Anybody who wants to talk to me, I'm willing to talk to them. And that includes on the diplomatic front. I don't just spend time with Republicans or Democrats. Every time I go to the Hill, it's usually one full day or 2 full days a week, I divide my day between Republicans and Democrats. Sometimes meetings are easier than others. It's wonderful to come into a senator who has no Jewish constituency whatsoever, and the first thing he'll say to me is, "What can I do for Israel?"
Yes.
It's really an astounding experience. And sometimes I'll come into a very left-leaning liberal Jewish senator who will tell me, he doesn't, or he or she doesn't like the government of Israel and complains about this policy or that. But I go to talk to everyone. Anyone who wants to talk to me, I'm ready to talk to them. And I think that's what the job of an ambassador is really, particularly of Israel. We have to keep Israel non-denominational and bipartisan. Israel is a message to the world. It's not a message to one particular people. It's a message to the world that you must not choose victimhood. You must overcome difficulty and persevere and tap into the resilience that God has graced us with as human beings.
Yeah, I've been taken by how you bring God and the Jewish people and Torah into many of your speeches. Um, as an example, at the Republican convention, you were introducing another politician or diplomat, and you talked about the integrity that Daniel the prophet had. And I thought how beautiful it is, not only in terms of that speech, but the book that you wrote on John Locke and how he was influenced by the Bible, by the Torah, as you mentioned. You have to be careful with that. Are people okay when you ensconce yourself in Torah ideas and Torah thoughts, or are there those who just say, "Hey, listen, let's not go there"?
There may be some. I haven't faced off with people who recoil at the notion of quoting the Bible. I mean, after all, if we can live in an age where Michel Foucault has taken over, the humanities departments in most of our academies, I think we should have some room for the Bible as well. I think he stands up to the insanities and inanities and depravities of Michel Foucault. And if we can quote, Foucault and Derrida and Heidegger and this whole gang of postmodernists who have thrust the world into a state of utter chaos, emotional, spiritual, intellectual chaos. I think we're okay quoting the Bible too. We don't just quote the Bible. I'm perfectly comfortable with quoting some of the great Western greats, intellectuals that have formulated the 20th and 21st century. But I think it's important that we include the Bible as well. It's the longest standing bestseller, and it has an awful lot to offer us in current events as well.
It does, absolutely. Ambassador, you alluded to the idea that you're the ambassador for everybody, be they right, be they left, be they centrists. I'd like to pick up on that thought for a moment. The Democrats in the United States, the progressive, let's say, there's an open skepticism that they have of Israel. What do you see as the most effective way to move the conversation forward, the disagreements, if you will, with those who are left of center, skeptical of Israel, maybe outrightly angry with Israel, and express that to you? How do you go about sort of influence them in any way that you possibly can?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to emphasize the fact that Israel is a liberal state, is the only liberal country in the Middle East. And that's where all freedoms are applied. I mean, not only freedom of worship for Christians, Muslims, and Jews throughout Jerusalem, throughout Israel as a whole, but for people of all stripes and shades and denominations and proclivities, and what would they compare that to? Do people have the same freedoms in Egypt or in Turkey? In Saudi Arabia? Well, of course not. We're the only country in the Middle East that is vaguely resembling of the culture and civilization of Western civilization. It's Judeo-Christian civilization. So everybody needs to just calm down a little bit and reorient and remember what exactly Israel is. We're an island of democracy, tolerance, and liberalism in an area where democracy has barely made a dent. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that, and I do say, the charges that we've faced over the past 2 years of, genocide and ethnic cleansing and starvation, I take it head on. And I explain to people that these charges are no different than the blood libel of the Middle Ages, where we were told that we put blood in the matzahs or we poisoned wells. These were blood libels, and they were generated by people interested in a particular narrative. Let's remember something. The charges of genocide didn't begin after we entered Gaza. The charges of genocide were already in the public on the streets of university campuses on October 8th. and publicly in the media already on October 13th.
Yes.
Okay, this was a very well orchestrated campaign to demonize Israel. At the root of it is the attempt to denude Israel of its right to defend itself. And a country that can't defend itself doesn't have a right to exist. Think about this. If you went to a dinner for, I don't know, the Congo or Sierra Leone, and you said to the audience, you were the guest speaker, you said to the audience, I believe in the right of Sierra Leone to exist, or I believe in the right of the Congo to exist. Do you think you draw applause? No. If you came in and you said, I think Congo has the right to defend itself, nobody in the audience would applaud. If you said, I believe in the right of Belgium, right, or Canada to defend itself or to exist, nobody would applaud you. But you go into a Jewish audience and you say, I believe in the right of Israel to exist and defend itself, and everybody immediately prostrates themselves and says, thank you. And you draw applause, because in reality, that is exactly what's being threatened. This is not, October 7th tore the mask over the masquerade, over the let's pretend that the issue is between this amount of territory or that amount of territory that Israel has to give up. October 7th was not about what territory we give up. It's about all the territory. It's about the existence of Israel. And from the river to the sea is annihilationist. It's eliminationist. It's eradicate Israel. It's not Judea, Samaria, or divide Jerusalem. Okay, that's the issue, our existence. And when you come to my progressive colleagues here and say, look, this is not an issue of territorial compromise. Don't give me back the two-state solution. They're not interested in a state. If anybody has read Hamas's charter, okay, what they really believe in, and if you're not patronizing, you believe when somebody says something to you, right? If somebody says, this is what I believe in, you have to tell them, no, you really believe in something else. Hamas says what they believe in, and they believe in the elimination of Israel. And the students on campuses around, the West who are screaming from the river to the sea are talking about the river to the sea. Israel exists between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. There is nothing else. If you eradicate that, there is no Jewish state. And that's exactly what they're talking about. There's the discreditation of Israel's very right to exist, because we're called colonizers. We're called conquistadors. We're talking about occupying somebody else's territory. We don't occupy somebody else's territory. These are not the occupied territories. They could be disputed territories. Okay, they can be disputed. Somebody else can come and claim them, but they're not occupied territories. We're not occupying somebody else's land. Okay, there could be a dispute over the land. And what I do on the Hill is, change the syntax, change the verbiage. We don't talk anymore about occupied territory. We talk about disputed territory. We don't talk about the West Bank. The West Bank didn't exist until 1942, when Jordan illegally annexed the territory of Judea and Samaria. I mean, how could you call Judea something other than Judea? That's where Jews come from. If you call Judea something else, you might as well call Jews, I don't know, something else. Maybe ask Nick Fuentes what you call the Jews. Jews are Jews because they come from Judea. That's who we are. So we have to be unapologetic. We have to be understanding. And we also have to be very assertive of our rights and about the truth. We didn't commit genocide. We didn't starve anybody. And we didn't commit ethnic cleansing. On the contrary, this was the most moral war implemented in the most ethical form of any war in modern history. No one has ever had to contend with 400 miles of terror tunnels under an area that's 24 miles long and 8 miles wide. Unprecedented, with buildings all throughout the area. So you have a terror infrastructure on top of land, a terror infrastructure below ground, and 2 million people that you have to navigate in between to catch the terrorists. No one has ever had to contend with anything like this. And our soldiers, in many cases, gave their lives. I say this very frankly. My son would be alive today. If we if we conducted war the way that we're being accused in the media or in the United Nations or among some progressives, or in the words of a Tucker Carlson, for example, if we conducted war that way, then my son would be alive, hundreds of our soldiers would be alive, many of our people would be alive, but we don't conduct war that way. Okay, and our actual ratio of non-combatants to combatants was lower than any war in modern times, including U.S. figures in Iraq and Afghanistan.
You know, Mr. Ambassador, so much of what you're saying makes total sense to me. But as the ambassador, Israel's ambassador to the United States, you're in a room and the people in the room are yelling at you, right? They're not in agreement with what you just said. What strategies have you formulated, or what aspect of a strategy have you put together in order to try to bring those people on board more so, to understand that Israel is not genocidal, that it is a liberal oasis in the middle of many, many angry, antiquated people? You must have a strategy for that.
Well, I'll tell you a great story. I think it was the writer Jonathan Swift who once said that lies fly, whereas the truth limps.
Yes.
You limp sometimes, but you have to keep repeating the truth, and ultimately it can be vindicated. I went into a meeting with the editorial board of the New York Times. Now, the New York Times has been beating on Israel, really for decades, but it became very, very intense. It became completely outrageous during the war against Hamas. And as I told you, I speak to anybody who's willing to speak to me. And the director of press relations here in the embassy said, you've got to meet with the New York Times. I said, okay. I went into the editorial board, and I felt like I don't know if you know the story of Dostoevsky up against the firing squad. He was going to be shot, and that's how he developed epilepsy, because they said ready, aim, load, and before they actually said fire, he had a reprieve. But the fear of those few seconds made him so sick. So I walked in, and I was being bombarded from each side. I would say respectfully, but it was 15 on 1. Okay, it was completely monolithic, which in and of itself, I think, should raise an eyebrow or two. I mean, why is it that an editorial board would be so monolithic about anything? But I made the case, and apparently my statistics and the facts that I was producing made the room very unsettled.
Yes.
And they didn't have a response until finally one editor said to me, well, Ambassador, could everybody be wrong? I mean, what you're saying is really that we all have it wrong. Is that possible? I said, well, sir, I'll tell you. First of all, it's not everybody. There were a few independent, open-minded, iconoclastic individuals who were willing to go up against that which was PC, politically correct. And they came to see Gaza firsthand. For example, a journalist by the name of Douglas Murray. He spent a great deal of time in the tunnels with the army, viewing things from all sides, and he came away completely convinced that Israel was conducting the most ethical war he had ever imagined. And then, of course, there's an expert on urban warfare like John Spencer, who teaches urban warfare at West Point, who said there's been absolutely nothing like this battle, where you have so many terror tunnels below ground, where you never know where terrorists are going to pop out. And yet we did not strafe bomb population centers. We continued to prosecute the war through our infantry. And I said, so first of all, there are exceptions. It's not everyone. But to the extent that it's everyone, I said to the editorial board, maybe it's because of you. Because just a few weeks ago, you published on the front page of your newspaper, right? The newspaper that's all the news that's fit to print, you claim. You printed a picture on a third of the front page of a young boy by the name of Muhammad, who was being held by his mom, emaciated, with his spine protruding in the picture, a curved spine protruding this picture. It was a heart-wrenching picture. And the caption, together with the accompanying article, made it clear that that was a result of Israel starving the population. And when it was revealed a few days later that the baby, Muhammad, was suffering from cerebral palsy, and that his brother was standing next to him, perfectly healthy, but you cropped out the brother, right? I said, that's a blood libel, because you're accusing me of killing Muhammad. You're accusing me of killing that little baby. Now, a month before that happened, two of my employees, young diplomats, a beautiful couple, Sarah and Yaron, they were about to be engaged, were shot dead in the streets of Washington by someone moved by pictures just like that, or by claims just like that. So that is a libel against me, against my children, against my neighbors, against my country. I stopped for a minute, and one of the senior editors said to me, Ambassador, don't you think you're making too much of a misappropriation? Now I said, no, ma'am, that's not a misappropriation. That's a blood libel. That's what a libel is. You're accusing me of murder. We don't starve people. Even in the course of a war, we don't starve people. And this contagion is really what it was. It was contagion. You know, the Hamas Ministry of Health, which in and of itself, I mean, it's a joke. What do you mean the Hamas Ministry of Health? That would be like saying, I don't know, in Canada, you have an organization like MS-13, you know, like a gang, like a cartel, right? Would take over a neighborhood and then open up a social service network, right? And they would offer statistics. I mean, the whole thing's ridiculous. What do you mean the Hamas Health Ministry? These are a gang of murderers. They don't have health ministries. They issue numbers where everybody who dies, for example, natural death, crib death, anybody who's sick with COVID or flu, it's all because of Israel. Every death they registered as a death as a product of the war. They registered no one as combatants. They're never combatants. Anytime there's an incident, it's always women and children. The whole thing is a farce. Now, what happens is the UN, which is notoriously anti-Israel, which passes more anti-Israel resolutions during the course of the year than all the resolutions combined regarding war zones. They pick up the numbers from Hamas Health Ministry. They become official UN statistics. They're picked up by the media as, you know, revelations from Sinai, because that's what the UN said. And then they get picked up by politicians around the world, and we have accusations of genocide. So this is a contagion, a social contagion, a media contagion, a political contagion of correctness. And everybody follows through because more people tend to be like, you know, sheep than they tend to be shepherds. And it's our job. It's our job. Anybody who has a platform, such as yourself, you're an ambassador too. You need to be an ambassador of truth, even if it's unpopular at times. You got to get out there and tell the truth. Israel did not starve anybody. We certainly didn't commit genocide. Were there pockets of people that were hungry? Yes, of course. It's a war zone. In a war zone, there are people that are hungry, particularly because Hamas was hijacking the semi-trailers that we were facilitating to come into Gaza. In other words, we don't provide the humanitarian aid. The agencies, international agencies do, but we facilitate them. Now, when those semi-trailers came in, they were immediately looted by Hamas. And the reason why is because that's how they support their minions. They had some 40,000 armed terrorists. They need to support them. But they also use this massive amount of humanitarian aid coming in to reconstitute themselves, to sell the food. They would take this, you know, tax-exempt donation food that was donated by people, maybe somebody like yourself, maybe somebody in your neighbors, your congregation got together and said, look, there are people hungry in Gaza. Let's give money to the World Food Kitchen or whatever. And these donations came over, but Hamas takes the food and sells them. So this was an insanity. that was going on. And the people of Israel came to the government and said, why are we allowing, on the one hand, our sons and daughters to fight against Hamas that's trying to kill them? With the other hand, we're providing those trying to kill them with aid, with the ability to do so. So we tried to create the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation together with the American State Department. All we did was get, to avoid having all of this food going to Hamas. And all we did was get criticized for it. Although we had a tremendous improvement in the situation. Initially, Hamas was getting 90% of the food being sent into Gaza, 90%. We had that reduced through the GHF to about 40%, 30%. It was a tremendous accomplishment, but of course we were, lambasted throughout the media once again, because it was a movement to avoid, to get around these UN agencies that were being subservient to Hamas. I'll just conclude this point with a story. I met with 5 senators who had all voted in favor of an arms embargo against Israel. I mean, imagine that, an arms embargo against Israel while we're fighting a 7-front war. And they asked to meet me, and I came into the meeting, and they said, why are you holding up humanitarian aid to Gaza, to the people of Gaza? I said, senators, we don't have a war with the people of Gaza. We have a war with Hamas. And we're not holding up any humanitarian aid. Well, why are there people that are hungry? I said, senators, they're hungry because Hamas is looting 90% of the semi-trailers carrying this humanitarian aid into Gaza. And one of the senators said, oh, come on, you don't know what's going on in Gaza. I said, no, Senator, actually I do. It's my business to know, because the ground of Gaza is actually drenched in my son's blood. So I know a thing or two about what's going on in Gaza. But I'm telling you that it's 90%. And then another senator said, no, we know that it's only 10%. I said, really? If a gang had taken over your county and was siphoning off 10% of your campaign funding, would you say, it's only 10%? He said, well, it's not the same thing. I said, you're right, it's not the same thing, because in this case, it's 90%. And they refused to believe it. And we knew the figures because, our Shabak, internal security, is pretty good. We know what was going on. When I came back to my office, one of my assistants came running into me a few days later and said, you're not going to believe this, but look at your computer. And she put in a UN address. And sure enough, the UN has an official tracking system of the aid that they bring into Gaza and the level of diversion. And lo and behold, right there, UN figures available for anybody to see, 91% of the aid brought into Gaza is diverted by Hamas. So I called back one of the senators and I said, look, go into this website, the UN website, and you'll see what I was saying, that 90% is diverted. And there was silence on the phone for a few minutes. He's looking at the screen. And he says to me, well, that doesn't mean it's being taken over by Hamas. I said, Senator, if you have a narrative that you're wedded to, there's no fact in the world that's going to move you from it. Mm-hmm. Who do you think is taking it? The dolphins in the Mediterranean? And besides which, if your point was that we're holding it up, you see that we're not holding it up. It's being diverted within Gaza, whether it's going to Hamas or not. But he had nothing to say. So you have to continue telling the truth. And thank God, the vast majority of the American people who I meet with daily in all different shades and forms and denominations are healthy, understand that, and aren't falling prey to some know-it-all podcasters whose interest is just to demonize and delegitimize. Most of Washington understands who we are and the level of friendship that we have with the United States that exists between us for so many years. And I would actually say that the level of friendship, the level of partnership between the United States and Israel is actually growing. The Vice President of the United States called us the model ally. And indeed, we are the model ally of the United States.
Mr. Ambassador, again, I think what you're saying is very encouraging. But I imagine that there are nights that you stay up, wee hours of the night, thinking about the problems of the Jewish people in Israel. And, it's no secret that antisemitism is proliferating, that it's growing dramatically despite what you're saying. There are huge groups of people out there on campuses and otherwise who hate us, who absolutely hate us. What are you doing to fight anti-Semitism?
Well, there are plenty of North American Jewish organizations whose job it is to fight anti-Semitism.
Yes.
It's not the job of the Israeli ambassador to fight anti-Semitism to the degree that it's not directly related to anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism. Now, because it is so interrelated at this point, and it's a new iteration, it's a new variant of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is around since Abraham said that it's not that man creates God, it's God creates man. Ever since then, there's kind of been this anti-Jewish hatred. He was thrown into a fiery furnace, and they've continued to try to do that for 3,500 years. So it goes through different iterations. But right now, the focus, of course, is people will say, "Oh, I love Jews, I just hate Israel." Well, to them I say, don't tell me what my Judaism is. Okay, Judaism began with Abraham uniting with the land. Okay, that's how Zionism didn't begin in the 19th century. Herzl talked about reconstituting, about recreating. He didn't talk about something that was something out of nothing, yesh me'ayin, something that came from nowhere. He based himself on a 3.5 millennia of history. So we were reconstituting the Jewish state. And the way you combat something which is a fallacy, which is libelous, which is hate-filled, is that you combat it with the truth, and you combat it with love, and you combat it with the resilience that we've had throughout these years. We're not going anywhere. Yeah. So first, accept that, right? Accept that. We're not going anywhere. This isn't some sort of experiment that's going to be over tomorrow. We're not going anywhere. We've come home. This is permanent. If anything's been proven over the past 2,000 years, is that living outside the land is not permanent. We're permanent. This is for keeps. And now let's begin with that. And the way to contend with hatred is to fight it. You fight it with facts, you fight it with truth, and you fight it with love at the same time. And be proud of who you are. I spend a lot of time with students, many Jewish students on campus. They get it. There are students who became October 8th Jews, who refused to hide after October 7th. Some remained October 6th Jews and want to hide their identity, embarrassed by their identity, that's not something which is going to advance our cause. When you have haters, you contend with them. When you have anti-Semitism, you contend with it. Without mentioning names, there are people on podcasters spreading all sorts of evil and lies about the Jewish people. You don't have to contend with those people, but you contend about the substance. Deal with the substance, not necessarily the person, okay? If somebody comes up and says, Israel's killing 20,000 children in Gaza, hit back with the facts. We didn't kill anybody intentionally in Gaza other than the terrorists. And if anybody killed children in Gaza, it's the terrorists that were responsible for it, when we tried every which way to avoid civilian casualties. And if you actually do the numbers, they're far, far lower than any modern wars, as I've mentioned before. And we're actually producing a book to that effect in the embassy right now. I hope it'll be out in a month's time, probably in time for at least for maybe Pesach at the latest, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, where we're going to circulate this en masse, which debunks the big blood libel myth about our conduct in the war in Gaza. So you fight it with all the means at your disposal, mostly with argumentation, with logic, rationality, and with a lot of pride and resilience.
Mr. Ambassador, I know that you're the father of 8 children, and your eldest son, Moshe, Zachrenu Livracha, was killed in the war. I have to tell you, this morning, I went into my son's room, who's 19 years old, and you'll remember what it was like to be 19. It was nice to sleep in till 11 or 12 o'clock. and I watched him sleeping, Mr. Ambassador. And I was thinking about you as I prepared for this podcast, and my heart, my heart went out to you and your family. Um, could you tell us a little bit about Moshe? What was he like?
It charged me to tell you a little bit about him.
Tell me a lot then.
Yeah. Look, he was my oldest son. He was the first one to call me dad, Abba.
Yeah.
He was 39 when he was killed. He spent some 15 years in Air Force Special Ops. He was a field fox, and that's why in reserve duty, when the generals of the Southern Command made plans to of October 7th, he was asked to lead he led the lead company of that division into Gaza. And he was very accomplished. He had spent time on operations that are still classified. I don't know what they are, but I know that he spent time, the joke is just he spent time overseas without a passport. He saved a lot of lives. His colleagues, his fellow soldiers told me stories about how he would get them out of very difficult predicaments to safety with calm and confidence. He decided to leave the army at 33 and go to med school. When he was sent to the Philippines in 2013 after the earthquake, and he saw Israeli doctors pulling out, he was in charge of their security there. And when he saw Israeli doctors pulling survivors out of the rubble after 5 and 6 days and bringing them back to life, he came back to Israel and said, Abba, I'm going to go to med school. And I said at the time, I thought he was nuts. I said, look, you're 33. You have at the time 4 kids. When he was killed, he had 6 kids. But he was always, there just wasn't enough time in his day for everything. And somehow there was enough time for everything. While he was in med school, he did 80, 90 days of reserve duty a year. He went to battalion commander's course. He led a program. He was actually drafted to run a program enlisting young Haredi men into the major intelligence unit in Israel. It's called Shmona Matayim. And it was a program that was limping along and failing. And the Minister of Defense thought that he could bring everybody together, which he did. He was a very unifying kind of individual. He was always brimming with confidence and love. He just loved people. And he was very, very special. He walked into a booby trap on Friday afternoon on November 10th, the end of the second week of the war. He had led the initial battles against Hamas in northern Gaza. And on Friday, just before Shabbat, 3:21 in the afternoon, he found a terror tunnel that he had been assigned to find in a mosque. But it wasn't in the mosque, it turned out. He didn't give up, though. He pursued finding the tunnel in close proximity to the mosque in one of the buildings. And when he found it, he said on the radio, we found the tunnel, Shabbat Shalom. The moment he said Shabbat Shalom, the terrorists in the tunnel had been following him with a hidden camera, and they set off a massive explosion, which brought the building down on Moshe and 3 of his colleagues, Yossi, Matan, and Sergei. They were killed, and 5 of his soldiers that were on the other side of the wall lost their legs. But thank God they remained alive. So, he used to say to me, when I asked him how he got through basic training, putting so much weight on his shoulders and walking for, dozens and dozens of miles. And he said to me, I developed my own patent. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I add weight. I said, how could you possibly add weight? You have so much weight on your shoulders. And he said, I add the hopes and prayers of my bubbies and zadis over the centuries, and that lightens the load. And what I'm left is to put him on my shoulders and his memory on my shoulders, and to help carry me through the day. And it lightens the load. It lightens the load that I carry, the responsibility that I have representing the Jewish people here in Washington. And it also instills confidence in me, because I'll tell you something. This generation, my children's generation, and I say this without hesitation and without trying to be patronizing, This is the greatest generation the Jewish people have ever had. If you take the generation of the Maccabees were a small group. Hashmonaim were a small sect of the Jewish people at the time. Most people remain October 6th Jews. This generation, hundreds of thousands of young people between the ages of 20 and 40, hundreds of thousands and some beyond, went to the battlefront willingly to give their life. And you have to understand that these people, have contributed in some cases 600 and 700 days of reserve duty.
Yes.
They've left their families, they left their businesses, they left their practices, they left their studies, and have served 600, 700 days of reserve duty over the past 2.5 years. There's never been a generation like this. And remember, on October 7th, who was it that saved the country? The chain of command had broken. It was a perfect storm. Everything fell for about 6 to 8 hours. Nothing worked. And the people who saved the country without getting orders or directions were the youth who hopped in their cars, took their personal weapons, thousands upon thousands, and went careening south to go into battle against an enemy that was armed to the teeth, that was brutal and uncompromising, that was barbarous in every respect. And they did so without an organized chain of command. That's what saved the country, because otherwise, these barbarians would not have stayed at the gates. They would have made their way up to Ashkelon and Ashdod, Bat Yam and Chulon and Tel Aviv. Well, this generation saved the country. This is the greatest generation of Jews we've ever had.
I'm wondering, I know you have to run, just a couple more questions. When Bibi approached you about this position that you currently hold, and he said, what would Moshe want from you? Was that something that was good to hear, or did you have problems with that?
It's not problems. You know, look, and you lose somebody you love so much, you have to make a decision whether or not you go on living. And it's very difficult. There were mornings after Moshe was killed that it was very difficult to scrape myself off the floor. Yeah. And I was going through that period of mourning. And the prime minister called and asked if I would go to Washington. I hesitated for a moment. He said, what would your son say? At that moment, I realized that I had to go on living for him. His life was cut short, but I had to go on living for everything he stood for. And that's really where I draw my strength from. You know, we come from a generation where we pride ourselves on our yichus, right? On where we come from. And that's good, that's important, and we still should. But we're in a very special generation. We're able to say, not only that I'm the son of, but I'm the father of. I'm the father of Moshe. Mm-hmm. I'm the grandson of Moshe, who was a sainted rabbi, a great scholar, but I'm also the father of Moshe, who was a commando in the reconstituted army of the Jewish people and gave his life for the safety and security of Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael.
Mr. Ambassador, finally, if Israel should go to war, the United States should go to war with Iran, what will your function be? What will you be doing?
Well, I'm a little too old to fly in an F-35.
Yes, you are.
I'll be making the connections between Jerusalem and Washington, and making sure that the operation and the objectives of the operation are maintained together in full collaboration, in demonstration and reflection of the deep and lasting friendship between the United States of America and Israel.
My friend, you have very broad shoulders. I can only imagine what you know that we don't know, and I wish you well. I'd like to conclude my interviews with a poem about my guests, which has been produced by AI, and it goes as follows. History does not whisper in our lifetime, it thunders, and into that thunder steps Michael Leiter. Dr. Yechiel Michael Leiter, Ambassador of Israel to the United States, standing where nations are tested and alliance feel the strain of truth. Diplomacy in such hours is not ceremony. It is strategy. It is conviction. It is a nation's voice carried across oceans, spoken carefully enough to steady allies, strongly enough to warn storms. His path was never a single appointment. It was a crossing from study halls of philosophy to chambers of policy, from advising leaders to shaping the language of state. Chief of staff, strategist, scholar, a man who learned that ideas must survive reality if they hope to guide it. Born in America, forged in Israel, Michael Leiter stands as a bridge between thought and action, heritage and horizon, history remembered, and history still being written. But beneath the titles rests a quieter truth. He carries a name with him, Moshe, his firstborn son, a soldier, a commander, killed in Gaza after finding dangers that others would not have to go through. There are fathers who grieve in silence, and there are fathers whose grief becomes a voice. So when Ambassador Michael Leiter speaks of war, of responsibility, of restraint, he does not speak in theory. He speaks in memory, as a scholar, as a diplomat, as a father. 3 calling braided into one life. This was not merely an interview. It is a conversation at the fault line of our times, where history listens for the words of those who must answer it. Michael Yechiel, and thank you. A job well done. I'm grateful.
Thank you. It's been lovely to be with you. I wish you all the best success always. To you and your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening and for watching. As my mother of blessed memory used to say, Sei gesund, go in health, and we look forward to being with you once again soon. Thank you so much.
Sei gesund.